Crime experts have applauded the South African authorities for arresting a 46-year-old highly trained Israeli fugitive who is a gang leader attached to a criminal group called the Abergil Organisation. The man was arrested together with 7 others, and to discuss the proliferation of international, illegal activities in South Africa, we're joined by Interpol ambassador for the Turn Back campaign and security advisor Andy Mashaile, as well as organised crime investigator Chad Thomas, who is with IRS Forensic Investigations. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on our program. Thank you very much for being on our program. Let's kick off with you, Andy. A red notice for this man has been in place since 2015. What we understand is that he's been living in South Africa undetected since 2007. What can you share around how it was learned about how he was able to stay under the radar for so long?
Good afternoon to you, good evening to you and the heavyweight champion viewers of your show, the greatest show by the way in the afternoon, the full view. It is against the background that our country's constitution is welcoming to one and all, and key and critical would be ineffective and inefficient border management. I normally visit a number of places where you look at the border management, and the people who are managing the borders, are effective. The units that are deployed at the units, be it at your airports, your ports of entry, are up to scratch. It's easy for criminals to come here and live undetected because our ports of entry are porous. It's a fact. We all know it. It's not meant to upset anyone. But the fact is, our ports needs to be looked at and be resourced with technology, ensure that the people who are manning these ports have the necessary level of clearance. 1, 2, those who commit crime in that space needs to be moved from that space into other spaces where they will not be able to engage with people who are coming from outside of the country.
Chad, I'd like to pose that question to you as well, in terms of, how someone who is wanted on serious charges abroad can live undetected in a country like ours for so long.
It's of grave concern. One must understand that Yaniv Ben Simon and those that have been arrested with him weren't just hiding. The weapons that they were found with on that particular premises weren't for self-defense. You had weapons that had been customized with suppressors. You had a vehicle that had been customized as a sniper's nest, a vehicle that had been customized as a mobile torture chamber. It would appear that these guys were operating on South African soil, most probably not just in the drug dealing arena, but based on the fact that they found these weapons and these modified vehicles, they were also most probably involved in murder for hire syndicates. It will be very, very interesting to find out what the ballistics say about those particular weapons that were recovered. But of course, it goes back to the 1980s. South Africa has been a haven for international fugitives from various different organized crime syndicates for a long time. It started with Vito Palazzolo, who came here in the mid-80s. Of course, we all know about Radovan Krejcir, who came here. Luckily, he was arrested, but he never stopped his activities either. He hid in plain sight. Everybody knew he was a fugitive from the Czech authorities. He had come into South Africa under an assumed name. He'd been arrested, but then released pending his extradition hearing, and just assumed where he had left off in South Africa. It was quite unbelievable. More surprising is the fact that we become a haven for violent criminals. Not one, but 2 of those accused of killing the notorious Arkin from Serbia were found in South Africa. So it's really distressing that it's not just homegrown criminals that we have to contend with, but it's also imported criminals.
Just to the issue around how the bust happened, and Andy, security experts say it was a reflection of the good multidisciplinary working relationship between South African and other authorities. How does this type of cooperation come into being?
All law enforcement law agencies in 194 member countries of Interpol have an obligation to cooperate in the event that one commits crime in one country and flees to another country. the international cooperation as coordinated by the International Policing and Crime Prevention Organization, Interpol, have to work hand in glove. In this instance, the Israeli or the Tel Aviv Central National Bureau or the Israeli Interpol communicated with the Pretoria Central National Bureau after being informed by the Israelis that this gentleman lives in a suburb in Johannesburg in this or that street, obviously based on the intelligence that their organization, their crime intelligence organizations related to, amongst others, your Mossads of the world, your all of your embassies that are working hand in glove here, ensuring that there would be cooperation in looking for the information, searching for the information and finding out that individual. After identification of that information, Israeli Central National Bureau then spoke to Pretoria National Central Bureau. The outcomes would be the local law enforcement agencies in all of those countries where the fugitives are wanted would begin the process of surveying, staking, tracking, and tracing the individual, which is exactly what happened here in this instance, and that led to the arrest of this boss or gang leader and his lieutenants.
Quite a fascinating inside view. Chad, I want to come to you in your capacity as an investigator. I mean, there are certain trends, behaviors that allow sophisticated networks like this to thrive and to go undetected for long periods of time. What have we learned in the arrest that's now been effected and some of the intelligence that already exists in the space that the South African authorities can latch onto to prevent this from happening?
Well, look, for this particular project to have been executed with such precision, it's a testimony to the South African Police Services, their crime intelligence component, and of course the Special Task Force. They had to be the lead in this particular operation because it was on South African soil, and they were then supported by the international counterparts. It's not the first time that we've had Israelis arrested in South Africa and extradited. We had an incident in 2015, and then in 2016, there was the very well-publicized issue of Rabbi Berland, who was extradited from South Africa to Israel. But what this means for us is, and I'm not sure whether we're seeing so much progress in respect of successful projects within the crime intelligence space. We're seeing a lot of results, positive results with regards to kidnapping and other organized crime that's taking place in South Africa. And I'm not sure whether it's because it's pending that we go onto the grey list. And the grey list is in part because organized crime has been able to operate in South Africa. We're not being grey listed simply because of state capture. We're being grey listed because a lot of international organizations that are involved in criminal activities have taken advantage of our banking systems and our local infrastructure. But one must understand that our authorities, the majority of which are committed to fighting crime, do have capacity issues and infrastructure resource issues. The fact that they could come together and act upon this intelligence in such a manner, you must remember these were hardened criminals. They were armed with automatic rifles. They were armed with pistols. They had lengthened the length of the walls. They had drones. They had camera footage. These guys were prepared for the eventuality that they could at any stage either be taken down by the authorities or perhaps be the target of an attack by a rival crew. So the fact that our authorities could go in there and there were no fatalities, no injuries, it really is a testimony to our law enforcement in cooperation with international law enforcement.
And thank you for sharing, just the complexity on how these things happen. And in a sense, the elegance with which these arrests were effected. We do need a win in terms of South Africa's law enforcement. So I think psychologically, Chad, as a country, it's something, as you say, we need to celebrate. I want to come to what happens next. And Andy, he's wanted in Israel on murder and attempted murder charges. What happens now? Is there the likelihood of extradition?
There is likely to be a request for an extradition. But because of the fact that, which is my analysis, because of the fact that they have been found with weapons, they have been found with cash, one suspects that cash might be from extortion. One is not jumping the gun to mess up the case, but one looks at the small data, those drug weighing machines and scales and all those other things. I am definitely sure that South Africa would also be investigating, as my brother Chet has indicated, those weapons that have been found. Let's find out if they haven't killed anyone here. Let's find out if they haven't killed a police officer. Let's find out if those guns have not been used in a cash and transit hide. Let's find out if those guns have not been used in any form of robbery or kidnapping. So we, as South Africa, we must impress upon our law enforcement agents, SAPS, as well as the Hawks. We must impress upon them to investigate if crimes have been committed here. They would need to stand the heat in South Africa, as well as stand the heat back in Israel. I am sure the Department of Justice and government will do a government to government and find out ultimately where they will be housed, where they will be put in their cooler, so that they can have better minds and cool tempers.
Chad, final question to you around what we learn from busts like these, cooperation on an international scale like this, to roll back. I mean, you're also one of those who is of the belief that South Africa is a haven for internationally wanted fugitives. How do we undo that reputation?
Through effective crime fighting like this, to show that we're not a haven. The fact that Kretcher could come into South Africa under an assumed name, be held and then released and allowed to continue in the manner in which he did was a very poor indictment on our law enforcement at that particular time. From now on going forward, we have to ensure that if we have actionable intelligence, we liaise with our international counterparts and we ensure that those people are kept behind bars until such time as the extradition decision is made. Like we're seeing with the person who went by the alias Sasha in Cape Town, who was in the vehicle when Cyril Beek was assassinated. Since that incident occurred back in 2011, he's been held in prison pending his extradition back to Serbia. So we just need to show that we're very serious about fighting crime in South Africa, and I believe that we're turning the corner.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for coming in and shedding some more light and expertise on this recent bust. Interpol Ambassador Andy Mashaile, as well as organised crime investigator Chad Thomas.